Eli saw the beast break loose and knew, with a clarity that emptied his stomach, that no one else on the dock was close enough to die first. The Korath warbeast hit the chain rail in a blur of muscle, plated hide, and spit-flecked rage, 20 feet of something bred to survive arrows, heat, and bad decisions. The market concourse outside Vorn 4's northern freight arches erupted in shouts. Stall awnings snapped. Crates toppled. One of the handlers screamed for the tether team, but the beast had already half torn free and was moving wrong, wild with pain and panic. Eli had a split second to see the girl before the crowd swallowed her. Small, blue-skinned, dust-smudged, alone. She stood near the salt barges with one hand lifted as if she had been trying to calm the creature or hide from it, or both. Her dark eyes locked on the beast as it swung its horned head toward her. She looked too still, too shocked, like she could not believe the world had gotten this far out of control this fast. Then the beast lunged. Eli moved before thought could catch him. He hit the girl hard enough to knock them both sideways behind a stack of grain cases, and the world went violent around him. Claws tore through the case above his shoulder. Splinters and dust exploded across his face. The beast's impact shook the ground so hard his teeth clicked. He smelled hot breath, iron, and the bitter musk of animal fear. The girl made a thin, startled sound under him, and that was the only thing that kept him from freezing. "Stay down," he rasped. The beast roared again. The stack groaned. Eli pushed himself up on one elbow and looked straight into the beast's ruined eye. Up close, it was worse. Scarred, froth-mouthed, one foreleg dragged badly, blood dark under the fur. It wasn't just angry. It was hurt, cornered, and close enough to kill them both before anyone got a spear in range. The handlers were shouting from somewhere behind the freight lines. Too far, too slow. The girl's hand found his sleeve. He felt her trembling through the fabric. "Do not," she whispered in a language he did not know, voice shaking so hard it almost disappeared. He did not know if she meant don't move, don't leave, don't die, or all three. Then the beast lowered its head and charged the crates again. Eli did the one thing his father had always told him not to do when something larger and meaner wanted you dead. He stepped out in front of it. The impact hit him like a cartload of stone. The breath left him in one hard burst. He threw both arms up on instinct, braced, and somehow took enough of the blow across his shoulder and chest to keep the girl from being crushed. Pain flashed white through him. He stumbled backward into the salt dust, boots skidding, one arm wrapping still tighter around the stranger in his hands. The beast reared for a second strike, and then, from somewhere beyond the freight arches, a deep command voice cut through the chaos like a blade. Enough. The beast froze. Every sound in the market seemed to stop with it. Handlers dropped to one knee, so fast Eli thought they might have practiced it. The wounded beast's breathing came fast and wet now, its head lowered with a sudden, shocked obedience. The girl in Eli's arms went rigid. Then she lifted her face. A dozen people around the dock bowed. Eli felt the entire shape of the scene shift under him. One handler, pale beneath his salt mask, looked straight at the child and went white. "My lord's daughter," he whispered. Eli's grip tightened before he could stop himself. The girl looked at him, then at the handlers, then at the beast that had nearly killed her. Her lower lip trembled once, and then she said in clear, careful words that somehow needed no translation to be understood. He stood in front of it. No one moved. One of the older Korath guards took a slow step forward and stared at Eli with such absolute disbelief that it felt like being weighed. Then another guard dropped to one knee, this time not for the child alone, but for the human still half covering her with his body. The first commander reached them at last, tall and armored and furious enough that Eli thought this was the part where he got dragged off the dock and punished for touching someone important. Instead, the commander's eyes moved from the girl to Eli's bleeding shoulder and back again. "You," he said. Eli swallowed hard. "I was trying to stop the beast." The commander's jaw flexed. "You threw yourself in front of Kelver's daughter." It sounded less like an accusation than a legal sentence. The girl's hand had not left Eli's sleeve. He looked down at her, dizzy with pain and not understanding any of it. and she looked back at him with dark, unblinking eyes that were suddenly much too knowing for someone so small. Then she said the next words in perfect, solemn common. "You are marked now." The commander closed his eyes for one slow second. When he opened them again, every hard line in his face had become something sharper and more dangerous. "Bring him to camp," he ordered. Eli's mouth went dry. The commander looked at him as if he had already been judged, named, and claimed by laws Eli had never heard of. "If you survive a Korath beast and save a warlord's daughter," he said, "you do not walk away unchanged." The girl tightened her grip on his sleeve. And for the first time, Eli understood that the thing he had just saved was not only a child. It was the start of a war he had not meant to enter. They bound Eli's shoulder before they bound his future, and somehow the second part scared him more. He sat on the back ledge of a Korath cargo crawler as Vorn 4's market lights vanished behind a wall of red dusk and blowing salt. The vehicle growled over hardpan and broken trade roads, 6 iron-rimmed wheels hammering through the wasteland toward Kelver territory. 2 armored clan guards rode across from him in absolute silence. Between them, wrapped in a dark wool cloak too large for her thin frame, sat the girl he had dragged out from under a war beast. She had not let him out of her sight once. Eli kept one hand pressed over the rough bandage, crossing his shoulder and chest. It was already soaked through in one corner. Every jolt of the crawler sent pain flashing down his ribs. Dust stuck to the blood at his collar. The sun set out over the flats, looked like a wound spread across the horizon. The girl watched him with huge, steady eyes. "Finally," she said, "you are making your face wrong." One of the guards glanced up, startled enough to break his stone expression for half a second. Eli blinked. "My face? You keep pretending the pain is smaller than it is." That one landed embarrassingly close to true. He looked away toward the salt plain, where old wind towers stood black against the red sky like broken spears. "I'm fine," he muttered. The girl's small chin lifted. "That is a poor lie." One guard made a low sound that might have been a suppressed laugh. The other shot him a look sharp enough to cut rope. Eli didn't know what to do with any of it. Less than an hour ago, he'd been a stable boy unloading feed crates and hoping to finish before the night cold hit. Now he was bleeding in the back of a warlord's crawler with armed aliens who looked at him like a legal problem, and a little girl who spoke to him as if she had already decided he belonged somewhere near her. He looked at her properly for the first time since the dock. She was younger than he'd thought in the chaos, maybe 8 or 9 by human guess, though Korath ages were a mystery to him. Her skin was deep dusk blue under the dust. Her hair, bound back in thin silver rings, had mostly come loose and hung wild around her face. She wore expensive cloth under the wool cloak, dark and layered, marked with bronze stitchwork at the collar. Even Eli, who knew almost nothing about clan rank beyond "do not offend anyone carrying a blade longer than your arm," could tell she was important enough to get him killed by accident. "Who are you?" he asked quietly. The guard stiffened at once. The girl answered anyway. "Sira." One of the guards spoke for the first time, voice deep and flat. "You will address her as Lady Sira." Sira didn't even look at him. "He pulled me out of death's mouth. He may use my name." The guard shut up. Eli stared at her. She stared right back, then tilted her head slightly, studying him the way someone might study a damaged but interesting animal. "What is your name?" she asked. "Eli." She waited. He sighed. "Eli Vance." "Eli Vance," she repeated, as if testing the shape of it. "You smell like hay." That one he couldn't help. A short laugh slipped out before the pain punished him for it. "I work stables." "Yes," she said seriously. "That seems obvious." The guard across from them looked away toward the horizon very quickly. The one beside Sira kept his face rigid, but Eli could see the corners of his mouth threatening treason. For one strange breath, the crawler felt less like a prisoner wagon and more like a bad dream that had forgotten to stay frightening. Then the front cab hatch opened. The commander from the dock climbed into the rear compartment without asking permission from the laws of space or tension. Up close, he seemed even larger. Scarred cheek, heavy black and bronze armor, the kind of presence that made air feel organized around him. He sat opposite Eli, resting one forearm on one raised knee, and the two guards lowered their eyes immediately. Sira did not. "My father knows?" she asked. The commander's expression gave away nothing. "He knows you were found." That was not the same answer. Sira knew it too. Her fingers tightened once on the edge of her cloak. And the beast. Contained. Alive. A beat. Yes. That surprised Eli more than anything else had. Sira turned her face toward the salt dark beyond the crawler and said nothing. But Eli saw the tightness in her jaw, the way relief and guilt seemed to pass through her at the same time. He filed it away without knowing why. Important girls weren't supposed to look guilty about monsters nearly killing them. Not in stories. But this wasn't a story. This was frontier law, blood, and whatever kind of world let a child look back at a war beast with sorrow. Then the commander looked at Eli. Not glanced. Looked. "You understand where you are going?" Eli met his gaze because dropping his eyes now felt too much like surrendering parts of himself he hadn't even counted yet. "Not really. You are being taken to Korath camp by direct order of Warlord Kelver." That did not help. Eli shifted against the crawler wall and instantly regretted it. "Because I got in the way of a beast?" "Because you survived its charge," the commander said. "Because you stood over the blood of his child. Because she named you marked before witnesses." Eli looked at Sira. "Mark means what?" The silence that followed was so complete, he thought maybe he'd said something unforgivable. It was Sira who answered. "It means the law saw you." That should not have made less sense than the other explanations, but somehow it did. Eli rubbed a hand over his face and felt dried salt and blood there. "I'm a stable boy." "No," the commander said. "You were." That sentence hit hard. Too hard. Because it slid under his ribs in exactly the place where old, lonely fears lived. Eli had never been important enough for anyone to change his life with a sentence. His father had died owning half the station. His mother had vanished into trader routes when he was 10, maybe dead, maybe just gone. The stable master who kept him on gave him work, meals, and exactly enough care to keep him useful. That had been life. Hard, narrow, survivable. Now, these people spoke like one act of stupid courage had broken it open beyond repair. Sira leaned slightly forward, her voice quieter now. "Are you afraid?" Eli almost laughed at that. Instead, he told the truth. "Yes." She nodded once, solemn as a judge. "Good. You are still thinking." The commander looked from her to Eli and back again. Something unreadable moved behind his eyes. Then the crawler hit a rise, and the clan camp appeared below them. It spread across the black salt basin like a city made of old war stories. Ring fire pits, tether towers, skin tents large as houses, long lines of beasts in armored pens, banners snapping under the night wind, marked with the hooked bronze sigil Eli had seen painted on freight crates and feared on the trade roads all his life. Men and women moved through the camp in layers of leather, bronze, and scar cloth, armed even while carrying water or tending cook fires. This was not a market clan or a caravan family. This was power living in the open. The crawler rolled down into it, and every head seemed to turn. Eli felt it at once, that pressure, the heat of being seen by too many strangers who all knew rules he didn't. He became painfully aware of the blood on his bandage, the dust on his boots, the fact that he had come here with no weapon, no family, no right name that meant anything to anyone. Sira touched his sleeve. "Just once. Brief. Deliberate. Do not bow unless my father makes you," she whispered. "And if he asks why you stood in front of Beast." She paused. Eli looked at her. For the first time since the dock, the warlord's daughter looked like a child again. Tired. Shaken. A little afraid. "Please," she said softly, "do not say it was nothing." The crawler rolled to a stop in the heart of the camp. And outside, waiting under torchlight with a ring of warriors at his back, stood the man who could decide whether Eli Vance had just been honored, claimed, or condemned. Warlord Kelver did not look surprised to see blood on Eli. That was the first thing Eli noticed when he climbed down from the crawler into the center of the Korath camp. Torchlight cut hard gold across the packed salt earth. Wind snapped the clan banners overhead. Warriors ringed the arrival lane in layered leather and bronze, broad-shouldered and still, hands resting near blade grips without seeming to. Behind them rose the camp itself, immense and disciplined under the night sky. All fire pits, beast pens, tether posts, and long low war tents stitched with old victories. And at the center of all of it stood Kelver. He was taller than the commander, older too, though not softened by it. His armor was darker, scaled at the shoulders, marked with thin white scars that had been polished instead of hidden. One side of his jaw carried a burn line old enough to have become part of his face. He stood with his hands behind his back, and the kind of patience that made Eli think sudden violence in this camp probably started from stillness, not shouting. Sira stepped down from the crawler first. The whole ring of warriors shifted, not forward but inward somehow, as if the camp itself took one collective breath when the child touched ground. Eli saw it and understood, suddenly and too late, that whatever happened next was bigger than gratitude. This girl mattered to all of them. Kelver's eyes moved over his daughter once, fast and exact. No obvious tenderness, no rush. But Eli saw the tiny change in the warlord's chest, a breath released too carefully to call relief. Then Sira walked straight past the commander and put herself in front of her father. "I returned," she said. Kelver lowered his head just enough to meet her eyes. "You did." The words were simple. The silence after them wasn't. Eli stood a few feet away, aching shoulder throbbing, and felt like he had accidentally stepped into a family moment sharp enough to cut skin. Sira did not flinch under her father's gaze. The beast panicked. It was hurt. "I know. It was not trying to hunt me." A murmur moved through the nearest warriors. "Tiny. Dangerous." Eli saw the commander stiffen. Kelver's expression did not change. "That question will be judged later." Sira's fingers tightened once at her sides, but she nodded and stepped back. Then Kelver looked at Eli. Really looked. There it was again, that awful sensation from the crawler. Not being seen as a stable boy or a frightened kid with blood drying on his shirt, but as something named by a law he did not understand and everyone else did. Eli had spent his whole life being overlooked by people with power. He discovered, in that torchlit heartbeat, that being fully noticed by one of them was much worse. "You are Eli Vance," Kelver said. It wasn't a question. Eli swallowed. "Yes, sir." One eyebrow shifted at the title, but the warlord let it pass. "My daughter says you stood before a war beast." Eli's mouth went dry. Around them, the camp had gone silent enough that he could hear tethered beasts breathing in the pens and the low hiss of fire oil from the nearest torch baskets. Everyone was waiting, not for thanks, for something else. He thought of what Sira had said on the crawler. Please do not say it was nothing. So when Kelver asked, why? Eli did not reach for modesty or panic or the stupid frontier habit of pretending courage happened by accident. He told the truth. Because she was there, he said. The answer seemed to strike the camp sideways. Not dramatic enough for a legend. Not polished enough for court. Just true. Eli felt how naked it sounded the moment it left him. Kelver stared at him a long second. Then, unexpectedly, "And if she had not been my daughter?" Eli frowned before he could stop himself. The whole camp saw it. Bad move. Too late now. She still would have been a kid, he said. The commander beside the crawler shut his eyes for one hard beat, like this was either the exact right thing or the exact wrong thing, and he had no idea which would kill the boy slower. But Sira's face changed. Until that moment she had looked tense, controlled, like she was standing on the edge of some old rule she knew better than Eli ever would. Now, something warmer flickered across her expression. Not surprise. Recognition. As if he had just confirmed something she'd been hoping was true. Kelver saw that too. The warlord stepped closer. He did not loom. Men like him never needed to. He stopped close enough that Eli could see the pale flecks in his dark eyes and smell iron oil, leather, and the faint smoke of the camp clinging to his armor. Up close, Kelver felt less like a chieftain from trade road stories and more like the reason those stories survived. "You are wounded," Kelver said. "Yes." "You did not run." "No." "You have no clan protection here." Eli tried not to glance at the armed ring around him. "Seems accurate." A few warriors made small noises in their throats. Not laughter exactly. Interest. Then Kelver did something no one seemed ready for. He reached out and placed one broad hand, very carefully, against the uninjured side of Eli's chest, just above the heart. The whole camp dropped to one knee. Eli almost stepped back from pure shock. Only Sira's sudden grip on his wrist stopped him. "Do not move," or I said. Kelver's voice, when he spoke, carried through the camp like something old being unlocked. Before witness and fire, I named the death scene. Eli's pulse kicked hard. He didn't understand the words, but everyone else did. You could feel it in the silence, in the bowed heads, in the rigid stillness of the commander. In a way, Sira's fingers tightened around his wrist, like she was steadying both of them now. Kelver removed his hand. "You saved blood of my blood," he said. "Under clan law, that is not a thing I may discard." Eli looked from a warlord to the kneeling camp to the girl beside him and wished, for one weak, stupid second, that he had just stayed in the stables and let someone else be brave. "What does that mean?" he asked. The commander rose first, face unreadable. "It means, human, that your life has entered our law." That still doesn't explain anything. To his surprise, that came out sharper than fear usually let him be. Maybe pain did that. Maybe exhaustion. Maybe the simple fact that everybody around him kept talking like he'd tripped into destiny while he was still trying to figure out how not to bleed through the bandage. A few warriors looked offended. Kelver looked not offended. Measuring. Good, Eli thought wildly. At least someone here is enjoying himself. Sira stepped in before the silence hardened wrong. "Father, he does not know our forms." "No," Kelver said. "He does not." Then the warlord turned slightly and spoke to the gathered camp. "The beast lives. My daughter lives. The law sees both." His gaze returned to Eli. "At dawn, the salt pan circle will judge what follows." That word landed badly. Judge. Eli felt it hit in his stomach. "What follows?" he asked. This time it was an older woman near the fire line who answered, scarred chin lifted, voice rough with age and command. "Whether the law takes you in," she said, "or breaks you for touching what belongs to war." The camp did not react to the sentence, which somehow made it worse. Sira stepped closer to Eli now, shoulder nearly brushing his arm, and for the first time he understood that whatever she had been on the dock, frightened child, lost girl, near victim, here she was also something else entirely. A center point, a person whose nearness changed how others breathed. "He should be tended first," she said. The older woman snorted softly. Still human enough to leak, yes. A ripple moved through the kneeling warriors. Kelver looked at his daughter, then at Eli's blood-soaked bandage, and nodded once. "Take him to the heal tent." Relief came too fast and too shallow to trust. Eli started to speak, maybe to thank him, maybe to ask another doomed question, but Kelver lifted one hand and cut him off before the words formed. "Sleep if you can, Eli Vance," the warlord said. His voice had gone quieter now, more personal, which scared Eli more than the public ritual had. "Because if dawn binds you to us," Kelver said, "the boy who stepped off that crawler tonight will not be the one who leaves the circle." The heal tent smelled like smoke, iron, and something bitter enough to make Eli think Korath medicine had been invented by people who distrusted comfort on principle. He sat shirtless on the edge of a low-hide cot, while an elderly healer unwrapped the blood-stiff bandage from his shoulder with absolutely no mercy in her hands. The tent walls breathed softly with the night wind outside. Firelight from a hanging brazier painted everything in red-gold shadow. Shelves of bone needles, clay jars, stacked linen rolls, and the curved silhouettes of strange surgical tools he decided not to study too closely. Beyond the tent flap, the clan camp still lived in low voices and bootsteps, but the center of it had shifted. Dawn was coming. The salt pan circle waited. The healer clicked her tongue at his shoulder. You braced against the horn line. Eli gritted his teeth as cold liquid hit the torn skin. "I noticed. You should not be using that arm. I also noticed that." She made a dry sound that might have been disapproval or amusement. Hard to tell with Korath. "Good. Awareness is the first step toward not dying stupidly." That got a breath of laughter out of him before the next touch of medicine burned it away. He stared at the packed earth beneath his boots and tried not to move. The cut across his shoulder wasn't clean. Nothing from a war beast would be. It was a deep rake and bruised impact, both, like the creature had half struck and half thrown him. His ribs hurt too. His chest had that tight, ugly ache that meant tomorrow was going to be worse. The tent flap rustled. Eli looked up fast. Sira stood there in a fresh cloak, dark blue this time, her hair red-braided but still imperfect around the temples where someone had done the work too quickly. Two female guards remained just outside, visible as broad shadows against the firelit canvas. Sira had clearly slipped just far enough from formal watch to get what she wanted without technically disobeying anyone important. The healer didn't even turn around. If you came to hover, do it quietly. Sira entered anyway. Eli had no idea whether to stand, bow, or pretend this was normal. He settled for not falling off the cot. You shouldn't be out. Sira tilted her head. Neither should you. Pretty sure I got less choice. That is true. She stopped a few feet away, looking at him with that same unnerving steadiness from the crawler. Under the clean cloak and proper braids, she seemed more obviously what everyone said she was, the daughter of someone dangerous, raised inside laws older than trade roads. But there was still dust caught at the edge of one ear. Eli liked that more than he should have. It made her feel less like judgment, and more like a real person who had also had a terrible night. The healer pressed a cloth strip to his shoulder hard enough to make him hiss. Sira's eyes sharpened. You are hurting more now. That's because she's helping. The healer snorted. And still he has wit. Unfortunate. Sira came another half step closer. At the crawler, you asked what marked means. Eli looked at her. Yeah. She folded her hands in front of her, suddenly less child and more careful air. A life debt can be private. Gratitude can be traded. Honor can be spoken and finished. Marked is different. She paused, searching for words he'd actually understand. It means the law watched something impossible and decided it matters. That did not help as much as she seemed to think. Eli let out a breath. That sounds poetic enough to get me killed. It might. The honesty startled him into looking up fast. Sira didn't flinch from it. The healer began wrapping his shoulder again, tighter this time, and Eli endured in silence for a few seconds before he asked the question that had been digging under his ribs since Kelver spoke of the fire. What happens at dawn? Neither of them answered immediately. That scared him more than the beast had. At last the healer tied off the fresh bandage, sat back on her heels, and gave Sira a look that said the answer was now hers whether she liked it or not. Sira drew in a breath. The salt pan circle is old clan law, older than settlement walls, older than border maps. Her fingers tightened together once. When blood debt, beast law, and war rights all touch the same event, the circle decides what survives. Eli stared at her. That sentence was a crime. For the first time, Sira smiled. It changed her face completely. Made her look younger, warmer, almost ordinary for one dangerously brief second. It means the clan will judge whether you are to be repaid, claimed, adopted into protection, she hesitated, or challenged. His stomach dropped. Challenge how? This time the healer answered, rising with the empty medicine bowl in hand. By those who believe an outsider should not carry law in his blood. Eli felt the room get smaller. And if I lose? The healer gave him a flat look. Then the argument against you improves. With that, she moved toward the brazier table, leaving the silence to do its work. Eli looked back at Sira. You're serious? Yes. He stood too quickly, pain tearing across his ribs and shoulder, so hard his vision flashed. He caught himself on the cot frame with his good hand and swore under his breath. Sira moved instantly, then stopped herself before actually touching him. That hesitation told him more than if she had closed the distance. She wanted to help. She knew helping had consequences here. You should sit, she said quietly. I should be on a freight shuttle 2 valleys away. Yes, she said again, and somehow it sounded like an apology. He sat because his body gave him no honorable choice. Outside, the wind shifted. Through the tent wall came the low thunder of some penned beast answering another. The camp never really slept. It just waited differently at night. Eli scrubbed a hand over his face. Why didn't your father explain any of this? Sira's gaze dropped for the first time. Because if he speaks too early, people will say he decided from the heart before the law. A beat. And because he's trying not to look like a father before he looks like a warlord. That landed harder than Eli expected. He thought of Kelver in the torchlight, that tiny release of breath when Sira stepped safely off the crawler. Not softness, but something close enough to matter. "And you?" he asked. "What are you trying to look like?" Sira went still. The healer, pretending to sort jars, became very interested in a wall shelf. Sira answered without looking away. "Brave." The word was quiet. Too honest. Eli felt it hit somewhere inconveniently deep. He looked at her and saw the child from the dock layered under the air from the camp. The girl who'd almost died, the daughter who knew everyone was watching, the lonely little thing who had asked the right stranger not to call her rescue nothing. "Well," he said, voice rougher than he intended, "you're doing a pretty decent job." Her throat moved. "Just once. You do not know how afraid I was." "No," Eli said, "but I know what fear looks like when someone moves anyway." That held between them. Too long. Too warm. Eli became painfully aware that he was 16, half-dressed, bruised to hell, and sitting in a warlord's tent saying dangerous, honest things to the warlord's daughter while old laws sharpened themselves outside. Not ideal. Sira seemed to realize it too. She stepped back a fraction, enough to restore the proper distance and make the room colder. Then the tent flap opened again. Commander Drave entered without ceremony, ducking under the lint line with all the atmosphere of bad news, trying to look official. His gaze flicked from Eli on the cot to Sira standing too near him, and something unreadable passed across his face before discipline erased it. "My lady," he said, "your father asked for you." Sira didn't move at once. "And him?" Drave looked at Eli. "At dawn, he stands in the circle." Eli's mouth dried out. Drave continued, voice flat and hard as hammered bronze. "3 voices have claimed challenge rights already. A beastmaster, a blood cousin of the war pens, and 1 old-lost speaker from the eastern line." The healer muttered something dark under her breath. Eli stared at the commander. "3 people want me dead before breakfast?" Drave's expression didn't change. "No, I was almost worse. They want the law to decide whether you deserve to live as what you have become." The words settled over the tent like a blade, lowered point first. Sira looked at Eli, and for the first time since entering, her control cracked just enough for him to see the fear beneath it. Because whatever waited at dawn, it wasn't just his life under judgment anymore. It was his place in hers. Dawn came cold, white, and merciless across the salt pans. Eli felt it before he saw it. The chill slipped through the seams of the heel tent and settled into his sore ribs, his bruised shoulder, the back of his neck. He had not slept. He had drifted, maybe, in short, painful fragments between camp noises and bad thoughts. But sleep required the kind of safety he no longer had. By the time Commander Drave returned, the night fires outside had burned low and the eastern sky had turned the color of old bone. "Up," Drave said. Eli was already sitting on the edge of the cot. The commander tossed him a fresh shirt, dark and plain, and a sleeveless overwrap marked with no clan symbol at all. That bothered Eli more than if they'd dressed him in Korath colors. No symbol meant no one was claiming him yet. He was walking into the dawn as a question. The healer tightened his shoulder, binding one last time with ruthless efficiency. "Do not reach high. Do not twist left. If someone larger than you looks eager, avoid heroics." Eli dragged the shirt over his head one-handed and winced as the fabric settled against the bandage. "Helpful. I preserve useful things," she said. "Do not make me regret my standards." Then she stepped back, looked him over, and gave a short grunt. "You still look human." Drave snorted. Eli glanced between them. "I'm sensing that's not praise." "It is not," the healer said. Outside, the camp was already moving. The salt pan circle lay beyond the main ring of tents on a flat stretch of white-crusted earth where the wind had scoured the ground smooth over generations. Eli saw it the moment he stepped free of the heel tent, and his stomach turned over hard. The entire clan had gathered there in layered ranks around a broad, circular depression outlined by black stone posts. Banners cracked in the morning wind. Warriors stood in disciplined half-rings. Beast handlers occupied the outer edges near tether stakes. Old women wrapped in scarcloths sat on low-carved stools closest to the circle, their faces weathered into things no one argued with twice. And at the far side, under a tall standard of bronze hooks and black hide, stood Warlord Kelver. Sira stood to his right. That struck Eli harder than anything else in the morning. She was dressed differently now. No child's cloak, no tangled braids. Her dark hair had been bound back with bronze rings and narrow blade charms at the temples. Her layered robes were formal, deep midnight blue edged in copper thread, with a short shoulder mantle that made her look older and smaller at the same time. More untouchable, more watched. But when she saw him emerge beside Drave, something in her expression softened before she locked it down again. Good, Eli thought irrationally. At least one person here remembers I'm still a person. Then he noticed the three challengers. The first was impossible to miss. A massive Korarath male with scarred forearms and the hard, squared stance of someone who lived among dangerous animals and trusted pain more than speech. Beastmaster, Eli guessed. The second was leaner, younger, beautifully dressed for someone who wanted a legal killing to look ceremonial. Blood cousin, probably, with the kind of face that knew exactly how often it had been admired. The third was an older woman wrapped in layered ash-gray cloth with 6 metal rings through one ear and a staff carved in old script. The old lost speaker. She looked like she would be the most dangerous of the three. Drave saw Eli looking. Do not mistake this for a dual line. It's comforting that you knew I might. It is not comforting, Drave said. They walked him toward the circle. Every eye in the camp followed. Eli had worked in public spaces before, markets, stables, freight lanes, but this was different. This wasn't curiosity. It was judgment held in 1,000 bodies. He could feel his own smallness more sharply with every step. 16. Human. Wounded. No clan. No training in whatever ancient legal theater he had just been dropped into. His only qualification was that he had seen a child in danger and moved faster than common sense. At the edge of the circle, Drave stopped him with one hand to the good shoulder. Listen carefully, the commander said, voice low enough to stay between them. No one here can deny what you did. That is why they must argue what it means. Eli kept his eyes on the white salt ground ahead. That's supposed to make me feel better? No, Drave's grip tightened once, then released. It is supposed to keep you from answering like a frightened boy. A flash of irritation cut through the fear. I'm a frightened boy. Drave's expression didn't move. Then be one who thinks before speaking. He stepped away. That left Eli alone at the edge of the circle. A horn sounded once. Low, ancient. Kelver descended from the raised stone platform and entered the circle first. The crowd lowered their heads. The warlord stood in the exact center with the dawn wind moving his outer cloak and his scarred face lit white by the salt glare. Before witness, before blood, before the old salt that keeps no lie, Kelver said, and his voice carried easily over the pan, we call the death scene circle. The camp answered with one hard beat of fist to chest. Eli did not. Nobody corrected him. That somehow made it worse. Kelver turned his gaze on him. Eli Vance, son of no sworn house, worker of Warnfor, stepped forward. Eli stepped into the circle. The white ground reflected the morning light up into his eyes. The air felt colder inside the stones, as if the ring marked out something the rest of the world preferred not to disturb. He became abruptly aware of his heartbeat, of the stiffness in his shoulder, of the fact that Sira was somewhere behind Kelver watching this happen and unable to stop it. Kelver spoke again. You are here because you stood before Clan Beast and Death, and because my daughter lived through your choice. He paused. 3 voices claimed challenge right. They may now speak. The Beastmaster stepped forward first. He did not bow to Eli. He barely acknowledged him. His eyes stayed on Kelver. The creature was wounded before the dock breach, he said. Panicked, not blood-mad. This outsider interfered in beast law and spilled clan bloodline into common witness. Such acts are not automatically honorable. Sometimes they are merely disruptive. Eli felt his jaw tighten. The beautiful cousin came next, smiling just enough to make Eli dislike him instantly. A human stable boy throws himself into danger and survives. Admirable perhaps. But survival alone does not grant nearness to warblood. If we reward impulse with law, we invite every drifter in the trade lanes to claim greatness by accident. A few in the crowd murmured approval. Then the old law speaker planted her staff in the salt. The question is not whether he was brave, she said. Her voice was old leather and iron. The question is whether bravery without place can be trusted inside clan. That one landed, because it cut straight past the ritual language and hit the real nerve beneath all of this. Not what he did, what he was. Eli stood very still while the words moved around him like knives being weighed. Outsider, drifter, no place, no house. He knew those words, had lived inside them his whole life. Somehow it hurt more hearing them spoken formally, because here they weren't insults. They were legal categories. Kelver's gaze shifted to him at last. You may answer. 100 faces turned. Eli had no speech prepared, no training, no idea what these people considered honorable, clever, or doomed. He looked once towards Sira. Bad idea. Her face was controlled, but her hands were locked tightly together in front of her. Fear. For him. That did something reckless and steadying all at once. He looked back at the challengers. I didn't know your laws, he said. A ripple passed through the circle. Disapproval from some, attention from others. Eli kept going. I didn't know who she was. I saw a hurt beast and a kid alone in the wrong place at the wrong second. He forced himself not to look down, not to shrink under the weight of the crowd. If your law says I should have stopped to ask permission before getting between them, then your law and I are never going to get along. Silence slammed into the salt pan. Drave muttered something violent under his breath. The beautiful cousin looked delighted, like Eli had just dug his own grave with style. The Beastmaster's nostrils flared. And Sira went perfectly still, eyes bright, with something too fierce to be fear alone. Kelver did not move. Then, slowly, the old law speaker lifted her staff from the salt and pointed its carved end straight at Eli's chest. Good, she said. The entire circle seemed to lose balance for one impossible second. Because now, the old woman said, voice rising hard into the morning, we will see whether the human means those words enough to survive the proving. The word proving hit Eli harder than the beast had. Not because he knew what it meant, because everyone else did. The salt pan circle changed around him in a single breath. The murmurs died. Warriors along the outer ring straightened. Even the wind seemed to pull back and listen. Eli stood in the white glare with his bad shoulder throbbing under the wrap and felt, with a cold drop in his stomach, that whatever came next was no longer debate. It was demonstration. The old law speaker lowered her staff and studied him as if she had just pried open a locked box and found something more troublesome than expected. Bravery without place is noise, she said. Bravery that survives burden becomes law. Eli had no idea whether that was good for him. The beautiful cousin smiled like he did. Commander Drave stepped forward before Eli could say anything stupid. Elder Tereth, the boy is wounded. Observe, the old woman said. The proving circle traditionally allows delay when blood has already been spilled. Traditionally, Tereth said, the blood belongs to those who understand where they stand. A few hard murmurs of approval moved through the gathered clan. Eli looked from one face to another and realized with a sick twist that the challenge was not just about him surviving. It was about whether the camp would accept that someone outside their blood, outside their law, outside their world, had done something none of them could cleanly dismiss. If he failed now, they could call the rescue a mistake, a tragic interruption, a foolish human accident. If he endured, he didn't know what happened if he endured. That scared him more. Kelver's gaze moved to Eli at last. Do you understand what is being called? No, Eli said, because apparently truth was all he had left. The crowd made a low, shifting sound. Shock, maybe. Disapproval. But Kelver only nodded once, as though honesty under pressure confirmed some private suspicion. Tereth answered for the circle. You spoke against empty obedience. Now the law asks whether your courage belongs only to impulse, or whether it can carry weight when fear has time to think. She lifted one arm toward the far side of the salt basin. You will cross the white ground alone. Eli frowned. That's it. The beautiful cousin laughed softly. Human. Then Eli followed the line of Teritha's arm and understood why no one else was laughing. Beyond the ring of black posts, the salt pan dropped into a broad depression of cracked white crust and dull gray sand, maybe 200 yards across. At the far end stood 3 upright stones arranged in a narrow gate shape. Between here and there, half buried in the flats, were old iron hooks, snapped stakes, and weather-smooth bones large enough to belong to nothing he wanted to meet. The land itself looked wrong. Too clean in some places, too churned in others. He remembered the beast on the dock, and suddenly, cross the white ground sounded much less simple. "What's out there?" he asked. No one answered immediately. Sira did. "Old scent," she said from beside her father, voice tight. "Blood memory." They released challenge wind over the pan. Eli turned toward her. "Which means?" This time Drave answered. "The ground carries the smell of predator, prey, pain, and clan fear from generations of trials." His expression was stone. Some cross easily. Some break before the halfway point. Eli stared at the white expanse again. So that was the game. Not combat. Not exactly. A fear walk. A place designed to reach into whatever lived inside a person and drag it into daylight. For warriors raised on these laws, maybe it meant something sacred. For a 16-year-old stable boy from Vornfor with one working shoulder and a childhood full of being left behind, it sounded like a professionally managed nightmare. Terith planted her staff. If you turn back, the challenge voices gain weight. If you cross, their words weaken. She paused. If you collapse in panic, the law will name what you are. That last part lit anger through Eli so fast, it almost steadied him. What you are. As if fear and worth were the same thing. As if surviving long enough to be scared disqualified a person from matching. He heard himself ask, "And if I make it across?" The Beastmaster answered this time. "Then you face the second question." Of course there was a second question. Eli let out one breath and nearly laughed from pure disbelief. "You people really hate simple mornings." The line escaped before he could stop it. A few younger warriors in the outer ring betrayed themselves with sharp half-coughs. Even Drave's mouth twitched before discipline crushed it. The beautiful cousin looked offended on behalf of tradition. Terith looked, impossibly, amused. Sira did not smile. She was watching Eli with the kind of focus that made the whole circle feel narrower. Concern sat plain in her face now, too real to hide behind air training. He shouldn't have noticed that with this much at stake. He noticed anyway. Kelber saw it too. Of course he did. The Warlord stepped forward one pace, enough to reclaim the center of the moment. "The proving stands," he said, "but not as spectacle." His gaze cut across the 3 challengers in turn. If the boy crosses, challenge rights narrow. If he does not, none here will call his first act cowardice. Only insufficiency under law. The distinction sounded legal and cold, and somehow still better than what the others wanted. Eli rolled his shoulder once and immediately regretted it. Pain shot down his side. Fine. Good. At least his body was awake. He looked at the white pan, then back at Kelver. When Kelver's eyes didn't leave his. Now, of course. Drave moved to Eli's side as the crowd began opening a path toward the basin edge. "Listen carefully," the commander said under his breath. "Do not run. The wind feeds on it. The wind. It carries sound through the buried hollows. Some of what you hear will be real. Most of it won't." That settled badly in Eli's gut. What kind of things? Drave hesitated. That hesitation told Eli enough. "The kind that make you look back," the commander said. "Wonderful." They stopped at the line where packed ground gave way to white crust. Up close, the pan looked even stranger. Salt skin over soft pockets. Wind-cut grooves. Patches where the surface shimmered faintly though the day was still cold. The 3 standing stones at the far end looked miles away now. Sira had moved closer without him noticing. Not into the circle, just near enough that he could hear her if she kept her voice low. "You do not have to prove you saved me," she said. He turned his head toward her. For the first time since the crawler, she looked fully her age again. Not heir. Not Warlord's daughter. Just a scared girl, trying not to ask too much from someone already hurt because asking would make it real. I know, Eli said. That was not the same as saying he would stop. Her eyes searched his face. Then why are you still going? He could have said pride, anger, stubbornness, fear of what they'd name him if he refused. Instead, because she had been honest with him in the tent, he gave her the answer she'd probably hate most for being true. Because if I turn back now, he said quietly, they'll spend the rest of your life talking like I only saved you by accident. Sira's breath caught. For one dangerous second, something bright and startled moved between them. Not safety, not innocence, just recognition sharp enough to matter. Then Kelver's voice cut across the salt wind. Eli Vance. Step. Eli looked once more at the white ground ahead. Then he stepped onto the pan. At first, nothing happened. One boot on hard crust, then another. The wind moved cold across his face. Behind him, the entire Korath clan held its breath. 10 paces in, he heard the first whisper. It sounded exactly like his dead father. His father's voice came from the salt like it had been waiting there all these years. Eli stopped on instinct. The white pan stretched around him in wind-cut glare, the standing stones still far ahead, the camp a silent wall of dark figures behind. The voice had come from his left. No, behind him. No, under his feet. Rough, tired, familiar in the worst possible way. Boy, his throat closed. He had not heard that voice in 6 years. Not really. Memory was never this exact. Memory blurred edges, softened tone, stole breath from words. This was clean. Close. The same worn-out irritation. The same weight in the vowels like every sentence had been dragged uphill before reaching his mouth. You always did wait too long to move. Eli's hands curled into fists. Drave had warned him. Some of what you hear will be real. Most of it won't. That should have helped. It didn't. He took another step, and the salt crust gave a faint crack under his boot. Wind slipped over the pan in long, low currents, carrying dry mineral sting and something older underneath it. Animal musk. Rushed. Blood turned ghost and ground into powder. Every instinct in him wanted to turn around, to check the circle behind him, to prove to himself that no one else could hear it. He kept facing forward. Good, the voice said, closer now. Took you long enough to learn one thing. Eli's jaw locked. The trick wasn't that the pan lied. The trick was that it chose truths sharp enough to cut. He kept walking. The first 20 paces felt almost manageable. Cold wind. Bad memories. White ground. Pain in his shoulder pulsing in time with his heartbeat. He could survive that. He had survived worse with less warning. Then the whispers multiplied. They came from the shallow hollows in the salt, from the snapped steaks, from the bones half buried under crust. Some were human. Some weren't. A woman crying in a language he didn't know. A beast snarling low and wet. Laughter, distant and cruel. The clink of tether chain. Boots behind him that matched his stride for 3 steps and vanished when he almost looked. His breathing started to go wrong. Slow, he told himself. Don't feed it. The standing stones still looked too far away. He fixed his eyes on the center gap between them and kept putting one foot in front of the other. The salt pan was harder to cross than it first appeared. Some patches held. Others dipped under his weight with a treacherous crunch, forcing him to adjust fast with legs already tight from pain. Once his bad shoulder jolted when he slipped half a step and black sparks flashed at the edges of his vision. The whispers heard that weakness and sharpened. No one's coming for you, boy. That one wasn't his father. That one was his own voice at 10 years old. Locked inside the hayloft after the stable master's drunken nephew thought it would be funny to bar the hatch from outside. Eli had screamed until his throat bled. No one came until morning. Not because they couldn't hear. Because nobody had been looking for him. He staggered once and caught himself. The crowd behind him made no sound, but he could feel their watching. That made it worse somehow. If this had been private, he could have broken ugly and put himself back together later. But every step here was public. Every hitch in his breathing. Every hesitation. Every small betrayal of fear. The pan wanted him to remember what it felt like to be alone. Fine, he thought, anger flaring just enough to steady him. I remember. Another step, then another. The wind shifted. This time the voice that found him was soft. Eli. He froze harder than he had for his father. His mother. Not because he had heard her more recently. Because he hadn't. Her memory had faded worst of all. The line of her face, the sound of her laugh, the shape of her hands and his hair when he was too small to understand why she kept looking toward the road. He had clung to those scraps for years until even the clinging wore thin. But the pan gave her back to him in one impossible breath. Warm voice, tired smile behind the sound of it, and that old ache of wanting to be chosen. Eli, sweetheart. His eyes burned. He kept staring at the stones. You've done enough, the voice said gently. You can stop now. That nearly broke him. Because it wasn't mocking. It wasn't cruel. It was mercy shaped like surrender. And for one terrible second, he wanted it. Wanted to turn around, walk back, let these people call him insufficient, let the law spit him out, let somebody else deal with the mess of saving Warlord's daughters and crossing haunted salt. He could go back to being no one. The thought opened under him like a hole. His next step landed badly on soft crust, and his knee buckled. He dropped hard to one hand, salt biting into his palm, pain exploding through his shoulder, so bright he saw white inside white. A sound moved through the crowd behind him. Not quite a gasp. Close. Eli stayed there for one heartbeat too long, bent over in the pan with his hand in the salt and old voices crawling through the wind. There it is, the cruel laughter whispered. The stable boy shape of you. His chest heaved. He almost looked back. Then, over everything else, he heard one real voice. Not from the pan. From a circle. Sira. Eli. Just his name. No command. No plea. No rescue wrapped in sound. Just one frightened, furious, impossible little thread of reality thrown across the white ground to remind him there was a present beyond all the old ghosts trying to drag him backward. He pushed himself up. The pain was blinding for a second. His shoulder screamed. Salt clung to his palm and knees. His breath tore rough in his throat. But he got upright, and when the whispers came again, they felt thinner somehow, angrier at being denied. He risked one glance, not back but sideways. The camp stood beyond the black posts in a dark ring against the white. Faces unreadable at this distance. Banners snapping. Kelver a carved shadow at the front. And beside him, small and blue and bronze, Sira leaned one step too far past the line of the stones, as if she would come into the pan herself if anyone were foolish enough to let her. That sight hit him with a force he did not expect. Not because she was beautiful, though in that hard bright morning because she looked like she had already decided he mattered. No one had ever worn that expression for him before. The next 30 paces were worse. The pan changed as he went deeper. The crust thinned. Hollow spaces below the surface made each step sound wrong, as if people walked beneath him in older, invisible tunnels. The voices became less specific and more intimate, drifting through him instead of around him. Failure. Hunger. Cold. The stable master's voice telling him he was only useful when he worked. Market boys laughing at his patched sleeves. Traders looking through him like he was furniture with hands. Every little cut of a small life dragged into one white place and offered back as proof that he had always been lesser and would always be easier to discard. By the halfway point, he was shaking. He knew it. They knew it. The pan knew it. But shaking wasn't the same as stopping. Eli fixed on the standing stones and kept moving while the wind whispered everything he feared might be true. His father's disappointment. His mother's absence. The cheap loneliness of being the boy no one came back for until the day he became useful enough to keep around. And beneath all of it, one new fear. What if crossing changed nothing? What if he got there and was still just Eli Vance, stable boy, outsider, accident temporarily noticed by powerful people who would eventually remember he didn't belong among them? That was the whisper that hit deepest. He nearly missed the movement ahead because of it. Something dark shifted near the standing stones. Not wind, not shadow. A shape rising from the salt at the far end of the pan, slow and low and alive enough that Eli's skin went cold under the morning light. The second question, he realized, and whatever it was, it had teeth. The thing waiting by the standing stones was not a beast. At first, Eli thought it was. In the shimmer and glare of the salt pan, with his eyes stinging and his pulse hammering too hard to trust, the shape looked low and predatory enough for his body to choose fear before thought. But then it rose higher from behind the crusted ridge, and he saw bone-white antlers arching over a narrow skull, a lean body wrapped in old scars, and dark cloth strips tied along its throat and shoulders that snapped softly in the wind. Not wild. Worse. Chosen. The creature stood perfectly still between Eli and the gate of stones, watching him with pale, almost colorless eyes. It looked half-starved and half-sacred, the kind of thing people built laws around after it killed the wrong ancestor in the right season. Salt dust moved around its legs in thin streamers. The air changed near it. Even the whispers seemed to pull back. Eli stopped walking. His whole body had already had enough fear for one morning. It did not care. It found room for more. Behind him, the clan remained silent. That silence told him everything. This was still part of the proving. No one was coming. No one would shout a warning or explanation or even a useful insult. He stood alone in the white pan with one wrecked shoulder, his dead memories still clinging to the wind, and some ceremonial nightmare blocking the last stretch to the stones. The creature lowered its head. Not a charge. A study. Eli swallowed against a throat gone dry and forced himself to breathe through his nose. The smell reaching him wasn't like the war beast from the dock. No blood-frothed rage. No hot animal panic. This thing smelled like old hide, dry salt, and the faint metallic tang of iron rubbed smooth by many hands. A trial beast, he realized. Or worse, a witness beast. He hated this planet. The wind curled around him again, bringing whispers in broken layers. Not his father now. Not his mother. Just the dull, crushing voices of every time he had been measured and found too small. Not enough. Too thin. Too late. Too human. The creature took one step forward. Its hoof didn't crunch the salt. It pressed into it almost soundlessly, like the pan itself recognized the right of its weight. Eli's hand twitched at his side. No knife. No staff. Nothing. Of course nothing. This wasn't supposed to be a fight anyone could solve with steel. He thought of Dre's warning. Do not run. That one at least was easy. His legs had lost all interest in running several disasters ago. The creature's pale gaze stayed on him. Eli glanced at the standing stones behind it. Close now. Close enough that if he moved fast. Bad thought. The instant it formed, the beast's ears flicked and its body tightened. Right? No running. He tried another approach. Slowly, feeling foolish and exposed and very 16, Eli lifted his good hand a little away from his side. Open palm. Empty. His father had used that gesture on half-broken work animals and frightened foals when force would only make the fear meaner. It didn't always work, but sometimes a creature chose between harm and curiosity by one breath. Hey, Eli said, voice rough in the white silence. I'm having a bad morning too. The thing stared at him. From a circle, too far away to make out words, someone made a startled noise. Probably because talking to the trial beast was either stupid or forbidden. Eli no longer had the energy to care which. He took one careful step. The creature's head came up sharply. Eli froze. The whispers rushed back at once, hungry for the pause. See? The wind hissed. Even now you move wrong. His pulse battered at his ribs. Pain radiated hot and ugly through his bandaged shoulder. The whole salt pan wanted him fractured, looking backward, inward, anywhere but through. He realized suddenly that this second question was not really about the creature. Not entirely. It was about what he did when fear had a face in front of him instead of a voice behind him. The creature snorted. Fine white dust blew from its nostrils. Then, unexpectedly, it turned its head just slightly to the side. Not away. An opening. Eli saw it and didn't trust it. But there it was, clear as sunrise. A narrow path between the standing stones and the creature's left flank. Not safe. Not generous. Possible. He took another step, slower this time. The beast watched. Another. Every nerve in him screamed to hurry before it changed its mind. He did not hurry. He He let the fear sit in his throat and walked anyway, careful and plain, one step after another across the white crust. Halfway into the last stretch, the creature moved. Fast. Not at him. Around him. It circled in one clean, silent burst, cutting across his path, so sharply Eli stumbled backward on instinct. Salt cracked under his boot. Pain shot through his shoulder. He nearly went down again. The whispers pounced. There you are. Fall. Break. Prove them right. The creature stopped 3 paces away, broadside now, pale eyes fixed on him with eerie human patience. Around its throat, Eli saw the dark cloth strips more clearly. Each one was marked with tiny bronze hooks and old dried reddish stains. Not decoration. Offerings. This thing had stood in many circles. Many had failed in front of it. A terrible understanding slid into place. It was waiting to see if he would lash out. At fear. At pain. At being trapped and watched and judged by rules he hadn't chosen. The proving wasn't asking if he could survive terror. It was asking what terror turned him into. Eli laughed once, breathless and bitter. That's ugly, he muttered. The beast flicked one ear. He thought of the dock. Sira in the wrong place. The war beast charging. He had not stepped forward because he was fearless. He had stepped forward because someone smaller needed him to. Maybe that was all he had. Maybe that was enough. Slowly, Eli lowered himself to one knee in the salt. It hurt so badly he almost blacked out. The crowd behind him made a sound this time. Real shock. He ignored it. He kept his gaze on the pale-eyed creature and rested his open hand against the white crust, palm visible, weaponless, all the old fear in him dragged into daylight and not hidden anymore. I'm scared, he said to the beast, to the clan, to the pan, maybe to himself most of all. I've been scared most of my life. Wind skimmed over the salt. The creature did not move. Eli swallowed. But I'm still here. The sentence came out quiet. Small even. Not brave enough for songs. Not polished enough for law. True enough to matter. For one long, suspended heartbeat, nothing happened. Then the creature stepped toward him. Eli stayed kneeling. It came close enough that he could see the tiny scars around its muzzle, the old chips in one horn tip, the clouded edge in its left eye. It smelled of salt and iron and long memory. The pale gaze moved over him once, as if checking for lies. Then, with impossible calm, it lowered its narrow head and pressed the flat of one horn lightly against Eli's good shoulder. Not attack. Acceptance. Something broke across the circle behind him. Voices. Gasps. One sharp cry cut off fast. Eli didn't turn. Couldn't. His whole body had gone still around the point of contact, around the insane fact of this sacred ugly creature deciding not to break him. After a breath, it stepped aside. The path to the standing stones was open. Eli stood shakily, every muscle trembling now. He looked once at the creature. It blinked at him, slow and unreadable, then turned its head away as if bored by the outcome. Fine. He hated everybody here equally. He walked the last few steps and passed between the standing stones. The moment he crossed, a horn sounded from the camp. Then another. The silence shattered. Eli turned at last. The entire clan had risen. Kelver stood at the edge of the circle, face unreadable from this distance. Drave looked stunned despite himself. The beautiful cousin had gone white with fury. Elder Tereth had both hands on her staff and was smiling like she had just watched a lock finally choose the right key. And Sira. Sira was looking at him like the world had just changed shape under her feet. Then Kelver's voice carried over the white pan. Iron hard and impossible to mistake. The proving accepts him. Eli barely had time to understand that before Tereth struck her staff against the stone and shouted the words that made the entire clan roar as one. Then let Bloodlaw answer Bloodlaw. Bring forth the binding blade. The roar of the clan hit Eli a heartbeat after the words did, and neither one felt survivable. Bring forth the binding blade. He stood just beyond the standing stones with salt crust on his boots, blood drying under his fresh wrap, and the pale-eyed trial beast drifting away behind him like it had already forgotten he existed. Across the white pan, the Korath camp had come alive in a way that made the dock chaos feel childish. Warriors struck fists to chests. Old women rose from their stools. Banners snapped harder in the wind. What had been judgment a moment ago had turned into something else. Recognition, maybe, but edged enough that Eli could not mistake it for safety. He'd crossed. Apparently, that was the easy part. Commander Drave was already striding out over the salt to meet him, boots crunching through the white crust with none of the pan's earlier malice. Two other warriors followed several paces behind, carrying a long, narrow case wrapped in black hide. Neither of them looked thrilled about it. That worried Eli immediately. "What now?" he called, voice rough. Drave stopped in front of him and searched his face like he expected to find cracks there. "Now," he said, "the law stops pretending you are only a question. That is somehow not comforting. It is not meant to be." The commander turned and motioned Eli back toward the circle. The pale-eyed beast watched them go from a distance, already half lost in the glare. Eli glanced at it once over his shoulder. "That thing judged me." Drave kept walking. "That thing has judged warriors older than your bloodline on this world." "Great. Good for it." One of the warriors behind them made a sound suspiciously close to laughter. The other elbowed him without mercy. By the time Eli crossed back into the circle, the camp had reorganized itself. The old law speaker, Elder Tereth, stood at the front stone with her staff planted deep in the salt. Warlord Kelver waited opposite her, still and dark as a carved idol. The three challengers had shifted positions, Beastmaster grim, Blood Cousin pale with contained anger, Old Law satisfied in the worst possible way. And Sira stood between the Warlord's stone and the witness ring, no longer pretending calm. The moment Eli stepped inside the circle again, her eyes found him. Not his face first, his shoulder, his knees, his hands, checking for damage, checking whether the proving had taken more from him than the crowd could see. That did something strange to his chest. He looked away first because he didn't have the strength to unpack that while an entire war clan prepared to do something called Binding Blade. The black hide case was brought to Elder Tereth. She unwrapped it slowly, ceremonially, as if she had all the time in the world and no concept of what suspense did to outsiders. Inside lay a blade unlike anything Eli had seen in the Vorn 4 trade lanes. Not large, not ornate. Its metal was dark gray shot through with faint pale veins, as though salt had somehow crystallized inside the forged steel. The hilt was wrapped in old red leather, worn smooth by many hands. Bronze hooks hung below the guard, tiny and dull with age. It looked less like a weapon and more like a promise sharpened into shape. Eli's mouth dried out. Tereth lifted the blade across both palms and spoke to the circle. "The proving has accepted the outsider." The first challenge breaks. Her gaze flicked toward the beautiful cousin, who looked like he might enjoy murdering the concept of acceptance with his bare hands. Now Bloodlaw answers Bloodlaw. A life preserved under witness cannot remain loose among us. It must be bound, refused, or bought free. Eli blinked. Bought free? Drave muttered from beside him. Do not sound hopeful. Too late. Kelver stepped forward one pace. The law offers 3 roads. That sentence never led anywhere good. Eli said nothing. Kelver's gaze held him in place. 1. You refuse bond, surrender claim, and leave these lands with no protection under my name. A pause. Any blood voice offended by your nearness to my daughter may then seek private satisfaction. Eli stared. Drave translated without softness. You will be hunted legally. Good, Eli said. Excellent option. No one smiled. Kelver continued. 2. You accept silver payment, beast price, and escorted departure. The rescue is honored, but no clan tie is made. Eli almost asked what the catch was, then remembered where he was. What's the catch? This time it was Sira who answered, voice low and clear. They would call you paid. He turned toward her. She met his eyes without blinking. Some would say that means what happened at the dock can be closed like a trade debt. Finished. Smaller. Ah, there it was. Not just money. A story. A way to shrink what happened until it became convenient again. Eli looked back at the blade in Tereth's hands. And option 3? Silence settled first. Heavy enough to matter. Then Kelver said, You accept binding. The whole clan seemed to lean inward. Eli felt it in his bones. This was the real road. The dangerous one. The one they all cared about enough to make even the wind hold still. What does binding mean? He asked. No one rushed to answer. Of course they didn't. At last Tareth lowered the blade slightly and said, by salt, blood, and witnessed law, you would enter clan protection beneath Kelver's word. No one may hunt you without answer. No one may purchase your act away. Your life becomes tied to ours in judgment and defense. That sounded almost survivable until she added, and ours to yours. Eli's pulse tripped. He looked at Kelver. You just take me in? A low ripple moved through the circle at the blunt phrasing. But Kelver only studied him. Unreadable. Not as son, the warlord said. That should not have stung. It did anyway, a quick, stupid flash of something bruised and young. Kelver went on. Not as servant. Not as prisoner. As bound blood witness. Rare. Dangerous. Protected. His eyes sharpened. And answerable. There was the knife hidden in the silk. Answerable. So binding meant safety, but not freedom. Belonging, but not simplicity. A place, maybe, but one shaped by obligations he didn't understand and probably wouldn't survive if he misstepped inside. Eli's head hurt. He was 16. He had cleaned tack and hauled feed 2 days ago. He had no business choosing between legal hunting, political insult disguised as silver, and some ancient clan bond forged with a blade in front of hundreds of armed people. Can I ask a question? Tareth made a dry sound. You keep doing that, yes. A few scattered snorts moved through the outer ring. Eli ignored them. He looked straight at Kelver. If I take binding, what happens the next time one of your people decides I don't belong? This time the answer came not from the warlord, but from the Beastmaster challenger. Then they answered to all of us. Eli turned sharply toward him. The big scarred handler stepped forward, jaw set like it offended him to say any of this out loud. The proving was accepted, he said. The witness beast touched you. I do not like waste, and I do not break law because a human unsettles me. Well, that was almost kind, in a deeply Korath way. Then the old law speaker added, belonging is not comfort, boy. It is consequence shared. And from the edge of the witness line, Sira said the thing that changed the room. If he had wanted comfort, she said, he would have left me to die. Every head turned toward her. She stepped fully into the open now, blue formal robes moving in the salt wind, small and steady, and far too brave for her age. Her gaze moved from the challengers to her father, and then, finally, to Eli. He stood when no law ordered him, she said. He crossed when fear had every right to own him. Her voice thinned for one heartbeat, then strengthened. If this circle calls him marked, then I will not watch him be traded down to something smaller, because his courage embarrasses us. The silence after that was enormous. Kelver looked at his daughter. Not warning, not anger, recognition. Eli stood in the middle of it, shoulder burning, heart beating too fast, and understood with sudden terrible clarity that whatever he chose next would not only change his own life. It would shape hers too. How they spoke of the dock. How the clan remembered this morning. Whether Sira's voice carried weight when she used it for something dangerous and inconveniently human. Elder Tareth turned the binding blade in her hands so the pale veined metal caught the morning light. Choose Eli Vance, she said, and in that white salt circle, with the warlord watching, the daughter holding her breath, and an entire clan waiting to see whether a stable boy would step into law or run from it, Eli realized the truth. He did not want to be paid for saving her. He did not want to be hunted for it either. What he wanted, stupidly, impossibly, was the thing he had never had. A place that would claim him back if he stayed. Eli had spent most of his life learning the price of being unclaimed. It was in the way people looked past you when harder choices arrived, in how quickly kindness vanished when it became inconvenient, in the cheap, practical cruelties reserved for boys nobody important would defend. A life like that taught you to survive in narrow spaces, to expect little, to treat hope like a street dog, fine from a distance, dangerous up close. So, of course, when the moment came to choose, hope was exactly what stood in front of him. Not the blade, not the warlord, not the watching ring of clan witnesses and challengers and old law keepers. Hope stood in the shape of a place at the edge of the circle, wearing blue and bronze, holding his gaze like she believed he could still step toward something better without breaking it. Eli looked at Sira for one heartbeat too long. Then he faced Elder Tereth and said, "I won't be paid." The words carried farther than he meant them to. A low murmur rolled through the gathered clan, rough and restless, but no one interrupted. Tereth's lined face did not change. And the first road, Eli let out a breath through his teeth. Also terrible. A few people actually laughed at that, shocked into it. The sound was brief, strangled, and immediately smothered, but it changed something in the air. Just a crack. Just enough to remind him these terrifying ceremonial people were still people. Kelver did not laugh. His dark gaze stayed on Eli with the same relentless weight it had carried since the dock, as if measuring whether Eli understood the shape of the answer he was giving. "Then speak the third road plainly," the warlord said. Eli swallowed. His shoulder throbbed. Salt dried stiff on his palm. Every old instinct in him screamed not to tie himself to powerful strangers with knives and laws and dangerous ideas about honor. But beneath that fear was a steadier truth, one he could feel settling into place with each breath. If he walked away now, he would spend the rest of his life knowing he had turned his back on the first open door that had not tried to make him smaller before he crossed through it. He lifted his chin. "I accept binding." This time the reaction was not a murmur. The whole circle seemed to take one collective breath, and the silence that followed felt ceremonial all by itself, deep, old, and heavy enough to press against his skin. Somewhere in the outer ranks, someone struck fist to chest. Then another answered. Then a third. The rhythm spread in uneven beats before Elder Tereth slammed her staff once into the salt and cut the sound dead. "So witnessed," she said. The black vein blade flashed in her hands as she turned toward Kelver. "Warlord of Korath, do you receive the accepted life beneath your word?" Kelver stepped forward into the open, up close, with the whole clan watching and no distance left to soften him. He looked even less like a man and more like some old law had dressed itself in armor and learned how to breathe. Scars crossed the backs of his hands. Bronze hooks gleamed at his collar. He did not glance at the circle for approval, because men like Kelver did not borrow authority from crowds. "I receive it," he said. The words hit the air like stones falling into deep water. Tereth nodded once and turned to Eli. "Then kneel." He did, not gracefully. His knees were already half ruined from the salt pan, and the movement dragged a white-hot line of pain through his bad shoulder. He hid the worst of it on instinct, though there was no hiding anything in this place. He could feel the witnesses watching for weakness, offense, uncertainty, perhaps all three. The blade came down between them, horizontal in Tereth's palms. "Blood may bind what witness has opened," she said, "but no law is forged one-handed." Her gaze shifted to Kelver. "Give your hand." The warlord extended his right hand without hesitation. Tereth then looked at Eli. He stared at her for half a second too long, then at the blade, then at Kelver's outstretched palm. "I'm guessing refusing the knife now would make this awkward." "It would make you a story told by idiots," Tereth replied. That almost helped. Eli extended his good hand. Up close, the binding blade looked older than the camp, older than the standing stones, older than the idea that one frightened human boy might one day kneel in front of it and be asked to choose a clan. Pale lines ran through the metal like frozen lightning. The edge was not mirror bright. It drank the light instead. Tereth shifted the hilt toward him. "You're cut first," she said. "Naturally." Eli took the blade carefully, trying not to show how unfamiliar his grip was. It was lighter than he expected and colder than any metal had a right to be under the morning sun. For a ridiculous instant, he was aware of every eye in the circle, of Sira somewhere to his left, of Drave standing rigid at his back, of the Beastmaster and Blood Cousin, and all the others waiting to see whether the outsider would flinch. He probably did flinch, but he drew the edge across the base of his palm anyway. Pain came sharp and immediate. Blood welled bright red against salt-whitened skin. Eli handed the blade back before his fingers could tighten around it too long. Kelver took it next. No hesitation. No dramatic pause. He opened his own palm with one clean draw and returned the blade to Tereth as if blood and law were ordinary tools he had carried his whole life. Maybe for him they were. Tereth set the blade aside onto the black hide case and caught Eli's wrist before he could instinctively pull away. Her grip was iron. She took Kelver's hand with the other and pressed their bleeding palms together. The shock of it froze Eli in place. Kelver's hand was larger, rougher, hotter than he expected. Blood slicked between them immediately, metallic and human and real in a way the ceremony had not been until that exact second. This was no longer abstract, no longer a law spoken over him from a distance. He was in it now, physically and irreversibly, skin against skin, wound against wound. Tereth's voice rose, old and formal, and carrying far past the front circle. Witness salt. Witness blood. Witness chosen bond. The crowd answered in one voice, harsh as wind over stone. Witness. Tereth tightened their joined hands. Life under word, she called. Witnessed. Protection under answer. Witnessed. Debt beyond silver. Witnessed. Eli's pulse beat hot through the cut in his palm. Kelver's expression never changed, but his grip adjusted once. Not gentler exactly, but firmer, as though acknowledging that Eli was not merely enduring this now. He was holding. Tereth's final words felt like a gate closing. Then let this one stand bound blood beneath Korath law until law is broken, blood is severed, or death itself disputes the claim. The clan struck fists to chest as one. The sound shook through Eli's ribs. Then Tereth released them. Eli started to pull his hand back, but Kelver caught his wrist before he could. The movement was swift enough to draw a startled breath from more than one witness. The warlord looked down at their blood-marked hands, then lifted Eli's palm high enough for the first ranks to see. Let no one call him unclaimed, Kelver said. No shout followed. No immediate pounding of chests. Just stunned silence, wider and deeper than any roar. Because this, Eli understood at once, was more than the ceremony required. This was personal. Across the circle, the blood cousin's face had gone rigid with fury. The Beastmaster looked grimly satisfied, as though a difficult rule had finally been obeyed. Commander Drave lowered his head once in what might have been respect. Elder Tereth, infuriatingly, looked unsurprised. And Sira's hand was pressed hard over her mouth, not to hide distress, to contain emotion. Something in Eli's chest gave way under the sight of it. Some old locked place he had kept barred so long he had forgotten it had a door. He looked away before anyone could read too much in his face. Kelver released his wrist at last. A younger attendant stepped forward immediately with a shallow bronze bowl of dark powder and clean cloth. Tereth took the powder, pressed it into Eli's cut with all the mercy of a tax collector, and wrapped his palm tight. He hissed through his teeth. That, he muttered, feels hostile. It is medicine, she said. It can be both. Again, a few startled laughs escaped the edges of the circle before people remembered themselves. The warlord turned then, not to Eli, but to the gathered clan. The law is complete, Kelver said. The bound witness remains beneath my protection. Any challenge against him now stands against my word, my bloodline, and the order of this camp. That landed exactly as hard as intended. Several heads bowed at once. Others went still in the way people did when they had just watched a political line get burned into the ground in front of them. The beautiful cousin did neither. He stepped forward. Not far, one pace, but in a silence this taut, it was as loud as a drawn blade. His face was composed now, carefully so, which made the anger underneath it worse. My warlord, he said, and the title was respectful enough to keep his teeth attached. Law may be complete, but consequence is not. Drave shifted immediately, a dark warning at the edge of motion. Kelver did not turn. Speak carefully, Wren. So, the cousin had a name. Wren bowed his head, the bare minimum required by survival. A bound witness under your protection changes succession weight, trade reading, and challenge optics, he said. Other clans will not hear this as mercy. They will hear leverage. There it was. Not just outrage. Politics. Eli stood very still, suddenly aware that whatever fragile safety binding had bought him came wrapped in fresh dangers he did not yet understand. Tirith planted her staff again. The law does not tremble because neighboring fools gossip. Ren's jaw tightened. No, but families do. The words struck the circle differently than open defiance would have. Too close to truth. Too close to private tensions already alive under the surface. And Sira moved before anyone else could answer. She stepped down from her place by her father's stone and into the open center of the ring, blue robes lifting in the wind, chin high despite the flush rising along her throat. Every witness turned toward her. Sira, Drave began. No, she said, not loudly, but with enough command to stop him. That alone reshaped the morning. She faced Ren first. Say what you mean. He looked at her, and for the first time, Eli saw something uglier than political caution in the cousin's expression. Not hatred, entitlement. The bruised outrage of someone watching a future he thought arranged for him begin to shift its shape. You know what I mean, Ren said. Sira's mouth thinned. Then let the witnesses know it too. The camp had become so quiet Eli could hear banner cloth snapping above the stones. Ren exhaled once through his nose. A rescued daughter binds gratitude. A bound outsider creates precedent. Precedent creates claims. And claims create factions. He did not look at Eli when he said it. He looked only at Sira. Understanding came late and hard. This was not really about Eli being human. Or not only that. This was about her. Her rank. Her future. Who might one day stand near her. Speak for her. Influence her. Marry her. Guard her. Weaken her. Strengthen her. Become useful to her. Or be used through her. Eli had fallen straight into the center of a web spun long before he ever set foot on the dock. He felt slightly sick. Kelver finally turned. The motion was small. The effect on the circle was immediate. Ren's spine went straighter by pure reflex. My daughter required rescue because your vigilance failed at the harbor, Kelver said. No one breathed. Ren's face lost color. The warlord's voice stayed level, which made it worse. You stand in a completed lost circle and speak to me of faction. He took one step forward. You were given witness place this morning because blood grants you courtesy. Do not mistake that courtesy for immunity. Ren lowered his head at once. My warlord. Not apology. Submission. Barely. Kelver let the silence stretch until it hurt. Then he said, leave the front ring. Ren obeyed. He did it cleanly enough to preserve some fragment of dignity, but the damage had been done. The witnesses had seen him checked, had seen Sira force him into plain speech, had seen the binding turn from ceremony into declaration into warning. Every piece of it mattered, even to Eli, who understood maybe half and felt all of it. When Ren withdrew, Kelver looked to Sira. For a strange second, the warlord's face altered, not softening, exactly, but becoming recognizably human beneath the command. You stepped into witness challenge, he said. Sira held his gaze. Yes. Why? The question landed heavier than any shout. It was not accusation. It was demand for truth. And Sira, impossible girl that she was, answered it with the whole clan listening. Because I am tired, she said, of brave acts being translated by lesser people into convenient stories. The wind moved through the circle. No one interrupted. She went on, voice steady now. He saved my life. He crossed the pan. He accepted binding when silver would have insulted the truth, and leaving would have fed cowards. If his presence alters the camp, then perhaps the camp needed altering. Eli's heart forgot how to beat for at least one full second. Taritha's expression crossed briefly into something dangerously close to delight. Drave looked as though he had just witnessed a soldier light a fuse indoors and admired it despite himself. Kelver studied his daughter for a long time. Then, to Eli's complete astonishment, the warlord nodded once. Then stand ready for the cost of saying so publicly, he said. I am, Sira replied. It was the most terrifying conversation Eli had ever heard between a father and daughter, mostly because it was also obviously affectionate by their standards. The formal ring should have ended there. Instead, Elder Tarith lifted her staff once more. There remains one unfinished matter. Of course there did. Eli closed his eyes briefly. I hate that sentence. This time the laughter that broke around the outer ranks was less strangled. Not friendly, not yet, but no longer purely hostile either. He had become legible to them in the worst possible way, as someone reckless enough to survive sacred trials and foolish enough to complain during ceremonies. Tereth ignored the sound. A bound witness must be housed, marked in registry, and placed under temporary guidance until custom is learned. Eli opened his eyes. Temporary guidance sounds suspiciously like supervised not dying. It is exactly that, Drave said. Wonderful. Tereth turned toward Kelver. Name the guide. The answer came too quickly. Sira. Every head in the circle snapped toward the Warlord. Sira went still. Drave outright blinked. Even Tereth lifted her brows a fraction. Eli wondered whether fainting would be dishonorable at this stage or simply practical. Kelver, having apparently decided the morning lacked sufficient chaos, continued in the same calm tone. The bound act concerns her life. Her witness is primary. Her knowledge of trade speech surpasses half this ring. Until registry and residence are settled, the outsider will learn under her direction. Ren, from the outer line, looked like he had just swallowed live coals. Sira recovered first, though the color in her face deepened. Father, she said carefully, that is not a small instruction. No, Kelver said. It is not. There was a world of meaning under that exchange, and Eli lacked a map for all of it. Drave cleared his throat. My warlord. With respect, protocol usually assigns a blade-sworn guard or elder attendant for first acclamation. Usually, Kelver agreed. That one word ended the argument. Because nothing about Eli Vance had been usual from the moment he threw himself between Sira and a charging beast on a foreign dock. Tereth inclined her head in acceptance of the ruling. Then So entered. An attendant near the registry stones hurried to scratch marks into a wax tablet with a bone stylus, immortalizing Eli's problems for future generations. Sira finally looked at him directly again. There was surprise in her face, yes, and strain, and the visible effort of adjusting to a decision she had not expected. But there was no regret. That was the part he felt like a blow. He had no idea what expression he gave her in return. Something tired, probably. Something stunned. Something far too honest for a public law circle. Whatever it was, her mouth softened for the briefest second before formal control returned. Drave stepped to Eli's side at last. Do not say anything foolish, he muttered without moving his lips. Eli kept his gaze forward. That is an unreasonable standard. For the next 10 breaths, achieve the unreasonable. Cruel. Alive. Fair enough. Elder Tereth struck the salt one final time. The lost circle closes. Blood is witnessed. Bond is entered. Let the midday meal carry the rest of your arguments elsewhere. That, apparently, was dismissal. The gathered clan began to break formation at once, though no one moved casually. Conversation sparked in low hard knots. Warriors cast Eli fresh measuring looks, no longer quite as one would examine a curiosity and not yet as one would regard kin. Elders leaned toward one another like crows around bright metal. Attendants moved in and out to gather cloths, the blade case, bowls, staffs. The formal shape of the morning collapsed into the much messier truth of aftermath. Eli stood in the center of it, exhausted down to the bone. He had started the day as an outsider on trial. Now he was bound by blood to a warlord, hated by at least one ambitious cousin, politically inconvenient to an entire camp, and, somehow, impossibly, placed under the guidance of the girl he had saved. It felt less like winning and more like surviving the first room of a much larger trap. Drave clapped a heavy hand onto his good shoulder, perhaps forgetting that Eli was mostly bruises and stubbornness at this point. Walk, the commander said. Eli winced. You people do every important thing standing up, don't you? Yes. Terrible culture. Drave's mouth twitched despite himself as he guided Eli out of the dissolving ring. Ahead, Sira was already waiting near the black post path that led deeper into camp, straight backed in the salt wind, blue robes bright against hide tents and bronze standards. She looked young again from a distance. Then she looked at him, and the steadiness in her gaze reminded him she was also the daughter of a man who could turn a single public sentence into a weapon. As Eli approached, the noises of the camp folded around them. Hammer on metal, low voices, tethered beasts, banners cracking overhead. Ordinary sounds, except nothing about his life was ordinary anymore. Sira glanced at his newly wrapped hand first, then at his face. "You look awful," she said. He let out one tired laugh. "That's comforting. You look like you just publicly threatened social order." A tiny, dangerous smile appeared. "I may have adjusted it." He stared at her. Then, despite the pain, the blood loss, the confusion, the politics closing in from all sides, Eli smiled back. And somewhere behind them, beyond the standing stones and the white pan and the echoes of old law, the pale-eyed witness beast cried out once across the salt, as if answering a bond the world itself had just been forced to acknowledge. The first thing Eli learned about Korath camps after becoming legally impossible was that nobody believed in privacy. Not really. They believed in distance, rank, and the courtesy of pretending not to hear things said in a low voice. But privacy, the simple human idea that a person might sit down somewhere and not be observed by 6 warriors, 2 elders, 1 resentful attendant, and a child holding a lizard, did not appear to exist anywhere within the black post boundaries of the camp. By the time Sira led him off the main salt path, Eli had collected enough stares to qualify as a regional spectacle. Some were curious, some openly hostile, some measured him with the cool, unsettling focus people used when recalculating a political problem that had started walking around in bandages. A few struck fist to chest as he passed. Not deeply, not fully, but enough to acknowledge the completed law, that somehow felt more intimidating than the hostile looks. He leaned closer to Sira as they walked. "Is it too late to choose the silver option?" "No," she said without looking at him. "But I would personally make your life miserable first." He glanced sideways. She was still wearing ceremonial blue, still carrying herself with that impossible composed grace the law circle seemed to require of everyone born to command. But now that they had left the witness stones behind, cracks had started to show. Strain around the eyes. A little too much stiffness in her shoulders. The aftermath of courage. Oddly, that made her seem more dangerous, not less. "That," Eli said, was a fast answer. "I considered it earlier. Honest. Threatening. Efficient. You people do have strengths." One corner of her mouth moved before she caught it. "You speak too freely. I nearly got adopted by a warlord at knife point. I think I've earned one personality flaw." She looked at him then, properly, and for one brief second the formal distance between them thinned enough for him to see the overwhelmed girl under the daughter of Kelverpoise. "You think that was adoption?" He winced. "No, that came out wrong." "Yes, it did." They walked on in silence for several paces. The camp unfolded around them in layered circles of purpose. Low-hide tents stretched between ironwood poles, their seams painted with clan marks in red and black. Bronze braziers burned smokeless near the central avenues. Weapon racks stood in ordered rows beside, training spaces cut flat into the salt-packed ground. Tether lines held creatures Eli did not want explained to him while he was this tired. Long-necked burdened beasts with plated jaws, 6-legged runners wrapped in travel cloth, and one massive horned thing asleep under a shade frame like a collapsed siege engine. Children moved around all of it with unnerving competence. One little boy, no older than 8, carried a bucket of something steaming past a pair of armed sentries without spilling a drop. A girl with her hair braided in bronze rings was sharpening a skinning hook under the supervision of a grandmother who looked capable of killing governments. Eli stared. "Your camp is terrifying." "It is functioning," Sira said. "That is not a rebuttal." This time she did smile, faint and brief. They turned off the main avenue toward a quieter cluster of tents set near a raised stone cistern. The traffic thinned. Fewer warriors. More attendants, scribes, healers, and older women whose glances could cut rope. Good. Eli was no longer sure his legs intended to remain part of any long-term plan. His wrapped palm throbbed in time with his shoulder. The ceremonial medicine in the cut burned like powdered fire. He had managed not to collapse in front of the entire clan, which felt like the sort of achievement no one would commemorate properly. Sira slowed. You are limping more. I'm trying to do it with dignity. You are failing. Cruel. Accurate. He laughed once under his breath, then regretted it immediately when the motion tugged his shoulder. Sira noticed. Of course she noticed. Without warning, she stopped beside the cistern and turned to face him fully. Sit. He blinked. That sounded like an order. It was. I thought I was bound witness, not captured cargo. And yet, she said, pointing to the stone rim, you are swaying. He had not realized that was visible. Annoying. Still, he sat. The stone was warm from the day's heat. His whole body tried to fold in on itself the instant he stopped moving. For a moment, he simply breathed, head bowed, while camp sounds drifted around them. Leather creaking, distant metalwork, voices carrying across hide walls. Sira remained standing. When he looked up, she was studying him with an expression he could not immediately sort. Not pity. Definitely not pity. Assessment, yes. Concern, yes. And beneath both, something more unsettled. Finally, she said, you should have taken the physician before the proving. You say that like I was offered one in a calm and reasonable environment. You were offered one by people who also said things like witness, beast, and blood law. Her gaze sharpened. You mock what you do not understand. Eli let out a tired breath. I mock when I'm afraid. That landed. The edge left her posture by degrees. Not fully. Just enough. I know, she said. The words were so quiet he almost missed them. He looked at her more carefully. Wind lifted a loose dark strand near her temple. She pushed it back with impatient fingers. Up close, without the full machinery of ceremony around her, she looked younger than she had in the circle. Younger, and more tired, and somehow braver for having gone back into the camp carrying all the same weight as before plus him. You didn't have to speak for me, he said. Sira's expression changed at once. Yes, I did. He frowned slightly. She folded her arms, but the gesture seemed less defensive than containing. If I had stayed silent, they would have turned what happened at the harbor into something smaller. Something easier. Payment, luck, inconvenience. An embarrassing story everyone could tidy and put away. I refused that. That was still dangerous. Yes. There was no performance in the answer. Eli studied her. You do that a lot? Do what? Walk directly into danger because the alternative offends you. Her eyes narrowed. You are in no position to criticize that habit. Fair. For a few seconds the air between them felt unexpectedly light. Then a shadow crossed the cistern stones, and both of them looked up. Commander Drave approached with the resigned expression of a man who had been given 3 new problems and suspected all of them were currently talking to each other. A broad-shouldered healer walked behind him carrying a leather satchel and the aura of someone unimpressed by rank, law, or survival stories. You are both needed alive, Drave announced. So I brought someone who can make that more likely. The healer, a severe woman with silver threaded through her braids, looked at Eli's shoulder and clicked her tongue. Sit still, outsider. I am sitting. Then learn silence too. Eli glanced at Sira. You all trained for hospitality from birth. Only the gifted, she said. Drave's mouth twitched. The healer set down her satchel, unwrapped fresh bandages, and immediately began peeling back the cloth on Eli's shoulder with the merciless competence of someone who considered pain a logistical detail. He hissed and bit back a sharper sound. Doc wound, she muttered. Salt exposure. Strain from the pan. Strain from kneeling. Strain from idiocy. I was busy. You were wounded. Also true. She prodded the edge of the injury. Eli saw white. Sira stepped closer before she seemed to realize she was doing it. Can he keep the arm? The healer looked up, unimpressed. If he obeys me for 1 full day, perhaps. That seems unlikely, Drave said. I'm right here, Eli muttered. The healer cleaned a wound with something that smelled medicinal and cruel. Eli fixed his gaze on the opposite tent line and concentrated on not embarrassing himself. Across the lane, 2 adolescent warriors were pretending not to watch. A small child had climbed a crate for a better view. Somewhere overhead, a strip of bronze chimes knocked softly in the wind. Done, the healer said at last, rewrapping the shoulder with efficient pulls. You will not lift weight with that arm. You will not train. You will not wander unattended. You will not interfere in clan disputes you do not understand. Eli considered that. How many of those rules are realistic? None, Drave said. The healer stood. Then he will heal badly. That, Sira said, is not encouragement. It is prediction. She gathered her satchel and left without further ceremony, brushing past Drave as if commanders were mostly furniture. Eli watched her go with deep respect. I like her, he said. She bit a raider's thumb off when she was 17, Drave replied. I like her more. At that, Sira actually laughed. It was brief, warm, and so startlingly unguarded that Eli turned to look at her before he thought better of it. The sound vanished as quickly as it had come, but its echo stayed in the air between them. Drave noticed. Of course he noticed. The commander cleared his throat with unnecessary force. Arrangements have changed twice in the last hour. I'm shocked, Eli said. You are being housed in the inner guest quarter. Eli blinked. That sounds expensive. It is secure, Sira corrected. That is the same thing, said politically. Drave ignored him. You will remain under temporary instruction until registry formalities are complete and the evening witness meal is done. Eli felt dread arrive fresh and healthy. There's another ceremony? Meal, Sira said. In this camp, those seem dangerously interchangeable. She did not deny it. Drave went on. You will attend because absence would be read as insult, fear, or illness. I'm ill. You are not dying loudly enough to excuse absence. That is a brutal standard. It is also the standard. Eli dropped his head into his good hand for a moment. I want one easy thing. Sira answered before Drave could. That was never likely once you chose binding. He looked up at her. Again, there was no mockery in it. Just truth. Hard, bright, and offered cleanly. Why did your father name you as my guide? He asked. Drave shifted as if to stop the question, then apparently decided it was already too late for strategic restraint. Sira was quiet for a moment. Because my witness is tied to yours, she said. Because I speak trade tongue better than most. Because he trusts me to say what others would soften. A pause. And because it unsettles people who should perhaps be unsettled. That last part sounded very Kelver. Eli huffed a tired laugh. Your family has alarming hobbies. We call it governance. He looked from her to Drave. And you're just letting this happen? Drave folded his arms. No one asked my joy. Do you object? The commander met his gaze directly. I object to instability, preventable bloodshed, and young people becoming symbols before they understand the cost. His eyes flicked once towards Sira, then back to Eli. But law is done. So now I prefer competence. That, Eli suspected, was as close to reassurance as Drave gave anyone short of the dead. A runner arrived before he could think of a reply. A lean camp youth with a shaved temple braid and dust up both legs. He struck fist to chest at Sira, then to Drave. Message from registry. The outer trade delegates have heard. Of course they had. Drave closed his eyes briefly. How loud? Loud enough that the Sand Varek have sent inquiry. The Hadron tents are pretending not to ask. Ren's mother is in argument with two elders in a cup. That last one may be the true threat, Sira murmured. The runner continued, eyes flicking once toward Eli with undisguised fascination. Also, the witness beast has not returned to its enclosure. Silence. Eli straightened a little. Its enclosure? Sira frowned. It always returns. Drave's expression hardened by a fraction. Search quietly. No panic. If found near the inner ring, send for beastmasters only. The runner vanished at once. Eli looked from one to the other. I hate the phrase if found near the inner ring. You hate many correct things, Sira said, but she was no longer fully attending to him. Her focus had shifted inward, thinking through implications. If the witness beast is loose after a binding, Drave finished for her. Someone may read it as omen. Is it? Neither answered quickly enough. That was answer enough. A dry gust moved through the cistern lane, carrying salt and hide smoke and the far-off cry of some tethered creature protesting its feed. The camp, which had seemed merely busy moments before, now felt charged in a different way, like a storm had walked in wearing ordinary clothes. Eli rose carefully from the cistern rim. Sira immediately said, "What are you doing?" "Standing. You were told not to wander." "This isn't wandering. This is very directed anxiety." Drave rubbed once at the bridge of his nose. "You are not joining a search for a sacred trial beast on your first afternoon as bound witness. That is an extremely specific sentence. It is also final." Eli looked at Sira for support and discovered, to his betrayal, that she agreed with the commander. "Absolutely not," she said. "If that creature is loose, the last thing anyone needs is you trying to be helpful. I'm sometimes helpful. You are frequently catastrophic." He opened his mouth, then closed it again. "Fair." Drave gestured down the lane. "Guest quarter. Now, before this day develops further ambitions." Sira hesitated only a second before inclining her head. "I'll take him." The commander gave Eli one long warning look. "Cause less trouble than your existence already has. No promises." "I know." He left at once, heading back toward the busier avenues with the purposeful stride of a man walking toward the next fire, because the current one was briefly contained. That left Eli and Sira alone by the cistern again. Well, mostly alone. 3 old women under a shade awning were very clearly pretending to sort dried roots while observing every heartbeat of the conversation. Eli nodded subtly in their direction. "You said there was no privacy." "I said nothing of the sort," Sira replied. "You discovered it." They began walking again, slower this time. The inner guest quarter sat beyond a curved wall of stacked salt brick and hide screens, painted with geometric landmarks. It was quieter there, cooler too, with woven shades stretched between posts and narrow channels that carried water runoff into clay basins for washing. The tents were larger, better spaced, and guarded with enough discretion to feel more intimidating, not less. As they passed through the entry gap, Eli glanced at her. "Are you worried?" Sira took a moment to answer. "Yes." "About the beast?" "Yes." He waited. She sighed softly, perhaps hearing the second question anyway. "And about what comes next?" "There it was." He nodded. "Same." She looked at him sidelong. "You should be far more worried than you seem." "I'm exhausted," he said. "It's interfering with the panic." That pulled another faint, almost smile from her. "Rest first. Panic later. Finally, a cultural practice I understand." She stopped before a low tent framed by black poles capped in bronze. 2 attendants waited nearby, with folded linens and the solemn expressions of people who had been warned that an unusual problem was about to become partially domestic. "This will be yours for now," Sira said. Eli stared at the tent, then at her. "Mine. For now. You say that like I might lose it in ritual combat. In this camp, that is never entirely impossible." He believed her. One of the attendants stepped forward, bowed to Sira, then to Eli with visible uncertainty, and held aside the entry flap. Inside, Eli could see rugs layered over packed earth, a low sleeping frame, a wash basin, a carved storage chest, and, glory beyond reason, a chair. He nearly got emotional. Sira noticed. "You are pleased by furniture. You have no idea." For the first time since the Law Circle, her composure fully cracked. Not in a bad way. Not in grief or anger or strain. She laughed again, more quietly this time, but longer, and the sound transformed her face so completely that Eli forgot every useful instinct he possessed. Then she seemed to realize she had done it and looked away. The silence that followed was not awkward exactly. It was worse. Aware. Eli cleared his throat. "So, temporary guidance." Sira folded her hands behind her back, recovering piece by piece. "Yes." "What does that involve?" Her eyes lifted to his again, steady now, though something warm still lingered under the control. "Keeping you alive through the evening meal. Teaching you which customs matter. Preventing you from accidentally insulting 3 generations of my clan before sunset." He nodded solemnly. "A heavy burden." "It is." "And after that?" The question slipped out more quietly than he intended. "After the meal." After the first day, after the public shock became private consequence, after the camp decided what shape to make of him, Sira held his gaze. After that, she said, you begin learning what your choice cost. No softness in the words, but no regret either. She stepped back then, giving the attendants room to fuss with practicalities. Washington, rest if you can. I will return before dusk to bring you to the witness meal. Eli should have said something clever, something light, something equal to the strange pull in his chest as she turned to leave. Instead, he said the truest thing available. I'm glad you were the one standing there. Sira paused. The breeze shifted the edge of her blue sleeve. For a long second she did not move, and Eli thought perhaps he had said too much. Then she looked back over her shoulder, and the expression in her eyes was far too open to be safe. So am I, she said. Then she was gone into the camp shadows, leaving Eli in the doorway of his borrowed tent with blood on his bandages, politics at his back, a sacred beast loose somewhere beyond the inner ring, and the deeply inconvenient certainty that binding had already changed more than law. Sira returned at dusk with a knife at her hip and worry she had tried, unsuccessfully, to hide. The camp had changed shape in the hours since she left him. Eli could feel it before he even stepped outside the guest tent. Voices traveled differently now, lower, tighter, with too many conversations stopping when someone passed. Fires had been lit along the inner lanes, their smoke thin and bitter in the cooling air. Bronze lanterns hung from black poles through warm circles over packed salt earth, and shadows moved between them in long shifting bands like the camp itself was thinking. He fell in a step beside her. You look rested, she said. I achieved something closer to unconsciousness. That may be enough. He glanced sideways. You look armed. I'm always armed. That was not comforting before. It's less comforting now. Sira did not answer immediately. Bad sign. The evening wind came colder off the flats, carrying brine, ash, beast musk, and a faint metallic smell that seemed to live in every corner of Korath camps. Eli's shoulder still ached under fresh bandages, and the cut in his palm burned every time his fingers flexed. But the sleep had cleared some of the fog from his mind, leaving just enough room for dread to settle properly. The witness beast still missing? He asked. Her mouth tightened. No. He waited. It returned on its own an hour ago. That should have been good news. The way she said it made it worse. And Sira kept her eyes ahead. It came back marked. Eli felt a small cold space open behind his ribs. Marked how it had ash worked into the fur at its throat. 3 lines. He frowned. That means something. Yes. You're going to make me ask. Yes. He exhaled sharply. Fine. What does it mean? She was quiet long enough that he almost thought she would refuse. Then, it is an old sign. Not lawful. Not formal. But known. The next words came flatter. It means bond contested. He stopped walking. Sira stopped too, turning toward him as torchlight and dusk cut bronze along the edge of her cheek. Around them, people moved through the lanes pretending not to watch, which meant they were all watching. Contested by who? Eli asked. We do not know. That is a terrible answer. It is the only honest one. He dragged his good hand over his face. I've been here less than a day. You are adapting quickly. That was not adaptation. That was despair. A tiny flicker touched her mouth and vanished. I know. They resumed walking, slower now. The witness meal was being held in a long central pavilion Eli had not entered before, open-sided and roofed in layered hides, stitched with red-black geometric patterns that snapped softly overhead. Fire bowls lined the outer posts. Low tables had been arranged in a wide horseshoe around a central space left deliberately open, less for comfort than for visibility. Nothing in this camp happened without witnesses if it mattered. As they approached, Eli saw the seating pattern and understood at once that dinner here was just politics wearing plates. Kelver sat at the head position on a raised blackwood platform. Not a throne exactly, but close enough to make honesty unnecessary. Elders and blood-ranked kin filled the inner curve. Commanders, beastmasters, trade voices, and selected witnesses sat farther out by precise degrees of importance. Runners moved quietly between them with trays of steaming meat, flatbread, bitter greens, and dark ceramic cups. A seat had been left for him. Of course it had. It stood on the inner right side. Not near Kelver, not among the lower attendants either. Visible, deliberate, slightly behind Sira's place. Eli stared at it like it might bite. "You're sure I can't be quietly forgotten?" he asked. "No." "Buried under a tablecloth?" "No." "Trade delegations do that sometimes." She looked at him. "You were lying." "Yes, but I'm trying to cope." That earned him a breath that might have been the beginning of a laugh, but her eyes stayed troubled. Before he could ask anything else, Commander Drave stepped from the pavilion shadows and joined them. He wore evening armor now, darker and cleaner, bronze hooks burnished to a muted glow. His expression suggested he had already prevented several disasters and expected at least 2 more before midnight. "The sign has spread," he said without preamble. Eli stared. "You all really know how to welcome people." Drave ignored that. "Some will test reaction tonight. Words only, if they are wise. And if they are not wise?" Sira answered. "Then they will remember my father's temper." Comforting in a deeply alarming way. Drave's gaze moved to Eli's face. "Do not answer every provocation. That sounds manageable. Also do not stay silent to the point of appearing weak. That directly contradicts the first instruction." "Yes, I hate this camp." "Noted," Drave said. He stepped aside and motioned them in. The noise inside the pavilion ebbed by degrees as Eli and Sira entered together. Not to silence. Silence would have been mercy. This was worse. The controlled lowering of voices, the subtle turn of heads, the recalculation of every person present as the bound witness became newly visible under lamplight. Eli felt the weight of eyes like weather. Kelver did not rise. He simply looked at them, and somehow that commanded more order than standing would have. "Sira," he said. "Father." "Eli Vance." Eli dipped his head a fraction. "Warlord." "Good," apparently. No one flinched. They took their seats. Eli tried to mirror everyone else's posture and immediately suspected he looked like a badly disguised criminal. A clay cup was set near his hand. He sniffed it cautiously. Sira murmured, "Drink. It is only spiced milk." "Only. It helps settle the nerves." "I'm concerned that your culture has a designated nerve beverage." "Drink." He drank. It was warm, thick, slightly salty, and aggressively aromatic. Not bad, just startling. Across the inner curve, Rin sat between an older woman with his eyes and a narrow-faced trade elder whose expression could have preserved fruit. Rin's composure had returned, at least on the surface. He did not look at Eli immediately, which was its own kind of hostility. Food came. A carved slice of roasted game. Flatbread blistered from hot stone. Bitter greens with fermented seeds. Something stewed and dark that Eli decided not to interrogate while hungry. The first stretch of the meal passed in formal near-quiet, broken only by serving phrases and brief exchanges of rank courtesy. It felt less like dinner and more like a ceasefire arranged around bowls. Then the old woman beside Ren set down her cup and said, clear enough for half the pavilion to hear, "In my mother's day, omens were not invited to table." There it was. No one reacted visibly. That was how Eli knew everyone had heard. Sira's hand tightened once around her cup. Drave, seated farther down, did not move at all. Kelver continued cutting his food as if the line had been spoken by distant wind. Eli felt every warning he had received collide uselessly in his head. Do not answer every provocation. Do not seem weak. So he chose the only path left. He tore a piece of bread, bought himself one breath, and said, "In mine, insulting an invited guest usually came after the second course." A sound escaped someone at the outer tables. Cough or laugh, impossible to tell. The old woman turned her gaze fully on him now. It was like being appraised by a jeweled knife. "Trade manners," she said. "Out decorative." Sira spoke before Eli could. "Aunt Severa, if you intend to challenge the witness sign, do so plainly. If you only intend to sour the meal, the kitchens can likely offer stronger vinegar." That landed harder than Eli expected. Several faces shifted, not shocked at the content, shocked that Sira had chosen public sharpness twice in one day. Severa's eyes narrowed. You spend your father's authority with a free hand tonight. No, Sira said. I spend my own. The pavilion changed around that sentence. Tiny movements. Shared glances. One elder setting down his cup with slow interest. Eli, who understood politics mostly as an expensive way of making rooms dangerous, felt the entire conversation tilt. Then Kelver spoke. The sign on the witness beast was coward's work. No raised voice. No visible anger. Yet the words cut through every other sound. He set down his knife. Any challenge to completed law will be named before me or not at all, he said. If hidden hands seek old symbols and camp whispers, let those hands hope they are never found. No one answered. Even Severa lowered her gaze to her plate. For 3 whole breaths, the danger eased. Then a runner entered the pavilion. He should not have. Everything about the room made that clear at once. Meals like this were insulated spaces. For a messenger to cross into one uncalled meant urgency or disaster. He struck fist to chest, breathing hard. My warlord. Kelver did not turn. Speak. The outer sentries report movement at the western salt markers. Drave was already half on his feet. What movement, he asked. The runner swallowed. 3 figures. Cloaked. No standards. They approached the marker line, left a token, and withdrew before challenge range. No one in the pavilion seemed to breathe. Kelver's face went still in a new way. What token? The runner's answer dropped into the center of the meal like a blade. A child's stable bell, my warlord. Tied in red thread. Eli forgot the room for one perfect instant. Forgot the tables, the firelight, the staring clan, the politics, the bond, all of it. Stable bell. His father had hung one outside their stall row when Eli was 7 because the latch stuck in winter and he liked hearing movement before dawn. A small cracked bell with a flat spot on one side where it had been stepped on by a mule. Eli had stolen it once for a game and been cuffed for it hard enough to taste blood. There could be thousands like it. There cannot be. Sira was looking at him now, alarm stripping all diplomacy from her face. Drave looked too. So did Kelver. The warlord rose at last. Seal the inner ring, he said. The pavilion exploded into motion. Benches scraped. Guards moved. Elders barked orders at attendants. Drave crossed the floor in 3 strides and caught Eli by the good shoulder before the noise could swallow him whole. Do not leave Sira's side, the commander said. Eli barely heard him. Out beyond the pavilion, across the dark salt and black post boundaries, someone had come to the western markers carrying a piece of his childhood in a world it should never have reached. And as the camp surged toward alarm, Eli understood with cold certainty that whatever found him on this planet had not come by accident. Ending. Someone from Eli's past has reached Korath territory, and the bond that was supposed to protect him has just made him a target.